You've probably tried it, written the goal down, said the affirmation in the mirror, visualized the life for 5 minutes before bed, then gone to sleep half believing it, half embarrassed you were doing it at all. And then, within a week, you quietly stopped. Not because it didn't work. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. It usually starts working faster than people expect. That's exactly why they stop. Manifestation isn't hard to practice because it's difficult. It's hard to practice because of what actually happens the moment it starts to work. And almost nobody warns you about that part in advance. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what's real in this idea, what's pop science nonsense borrowed from a field of physics it doesn't apply to, and the actual mechanism hiding underneath both, the one that explains why this practice is genuinely, measurably easy, and why almost no one sticks with it long enough to find that out. Stay for the physics correction alone. It's the part almost every manifestation video gets wrong, and once you see the actual explanation underneath it, you'll understand exactly why the practice works when it works, and exactly what you've been doing wrong every time it hasn't. Here's the uncomfortable question underneath everything we just described. If this is as easy as it sounds, why does almost everyone who tries it quit within days? I'll admit something before we go further, because it matters for what's coming. I quit the first 3 times I tried it. Not because nothing happened, because something did. Small and strange enough that I didn't know what to do with it. A conversation that lined up too neatly. An opportunity that arrived right after I'd stopped obsessing over needing it. And instead of leaning in, I got uncomfortable and stopped. It took me a long time to understand why that discomfort showed up exactly when the practice started working, not before. Looking back, I think I expected either total failure, which would have been easy to dismiss, or something dramatic enough to feel undeniably magical. What I got instead was smaller and stranger, coincidences just plausible enough to explain away, opportunities that looked almost but not quite like luck. That in-between result is actually the hardest one to sit with, because it doesn't give you the clean exit of "this is fake" or the clean confirmation of "this is definitely real." It just leaves you holding something ambiguous, and most people, myself included at the time, resolve that ambiguity by quietly walking away from it. Here's the mechanism, and it has nothing to do with the universe rearranging particles on your behalf. When you decide with real conviction that something is coming, not hoping, not wishing, actually deciding, your brain's filtering system changes. Every waking moment, your brain is bombarded with far more information than you can consciously process, so it filters almost all of it out before it ever reaches your awareness. What gets through is determined largely by what you've told your brain matters. Decide that a specific opportunity matters, with enough conviction, and your filtering system starts letting related information through that it was screening out before. The comment in a meeting, the name that comes up twice in 1 week, the opening that doesn't look like what you expected but fits what you asked for. This is not mystical. It's not the observer effect from quantum physics, even though that's the borrowed language most manifestation content reaches for. It's attention, doing exactly what attention has always done, just pointed somewhere new on purpose. There's a version of this most people have already experienced without connecting it to manifestation at all. You buy a car in a color you'd never noticed before, and suddenly that exact color seems to be everywhere on the road. Nothing changed about how many of those cars exist. What changed is that your attention now has a category it's actively scanning for. Manifestation, stripped of the mystical packaging, is the same mechanism deliberately pointed at a goal instead of a car color, except a goal, unlike a car color, requires you to actually act on what your attention surfaces, not just notice it. Here's the second half of the mechanism, the part most manifestation content skips entirely, because it's less exciting to talk about than the noticing. Once your attention starts surfacing relevant opportunities, you still have to do something with them. The comment in the meeting that lines up with your goal doesn't do anything on its own. You have to follow up on it. The name that comes up twice doesn't manifest a connection by itself. You have to actually reach out. This is where most manifestation practice quietly fails, not because the noticing didn't work, but because the person treated the noticing as the whole job when it was only ever half of it. The universe, so to speak, hands you the opening. It has never once, in any documented case, walked through the door for you. This 2-part structure, sharpened attention plus required action, explains something that puzzles a lot of people who've tried this practice. Why it sometimes seems to work dramatically for one goal and not at all for another, even when the belief felt equally strong both times. The difference is almost always in the second half. The goal that worked was one where the person acted immediately and repeatedly on what their sharpened attention surfaced. The goal that didn't work was one where the person kept believing, kept noticing, and kept not following through, mistaking the noticing itself for progress. I've watched this pattern in my own life closely enough now to catch it in real time. There's a specific feeling that shows up right before I fail to act on something my attention has surfaced. A kind of quiet, talking myself out of it, dressed up as caution. It's probably nothing. They're probably too busy. I'll wait for a better moment. Every single time I've later traced back a missed opportunity, that exact sentence was standing at the door. I don't say that to suggest I've solved it. I catch it more often now than I used to, which is the only honest claim I can make about it. So why does almost nobody stick with it long enough to see this play out? Because deciding with real conviction is the actual hard part, and it's harder than it sounds, for a reason most people never examine. A teacher once told a group of new elementary school teachers that 5 specific students in their classroom had scored unusually high on a test that predicted they were about to bloom academically that year. The teachers weren't told anything about the other students. By the end of the year, those 5 students had in fact shown significantly greater gains than their classmates, measured, real, on paper. Here's the twist. The 5 students had been picked completely at random. There was no special test. The only thing that had changed was what the teachers believed about them, and how that belief shaped, without either party fully realizing it, the attention, encouragement, and subtle opportunities those 5 students received all year. This was a real study, conducted by psychologists Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson in 1968, and it became one of the most cited findings in the history of educational psychology. They called the effect the Pygmalion effect, after the myth of a sculptor who fell in love with a statue he'd carved so completely that it came to life. The belief itself didn't move a single atom. What it moved was behavior, the teachers, which shaped the students' opportunities, which shaped the students' results. It's worth being precise about how the effect actually worked, because the mechanism is what makes it useful to you, not the headline. Follow-up research on the Pygmalion effect identified specific behavioral channels. Teachers who believed in a student's potential gave that student more time to answer questions, offered warmer nonverbal feedback, and provided more detailed, higher quality corrections when the student got something wrong. None of that required magic. It required a belief translating, almost automatically and mostly unconsciously, into a stream of small behavioral advantages that compounded over an entire school year. The effect has since been observed in various forms, well beyond classrooms. In management research, where supervisors who expect more from employees tend to get more from them through the same channels of attention and feedback, and in other institutional settings where one person's expectation of another has room to shape ongoing behavior over time. The consistency across these different settings is part of what makes the mechanism credible, rather than a one-off curiosity from a single 1968 study. Now here's where most manifestation content goes wrong, and where this video is going to do something most of them won't. It's going to correct itself. You've probably heard manifestation described using quantum physics. Your consciousness collapses the wave function. You're literally creating your reality at the quantum level. This is worth addressing directly, because it's a real misuse of real science, and pretending otherwise would make everything else in this video less trustworthy. The observer effect in quantum mechanics is real. At the scale of subatomic particles, the act of measurement does appear to affect certain quantum states. This is genuinely one of the strangest, most debated findings in physics, and physicists themselves still argue over how to interpret it. What is not supported by mainstream physics is the leap from measurement affects particles at the quantum scale to your thoughts affect macroscopic outcomes in your life, like job offers or relationships, through the same mechanism. That leap has no experimental support. It's a metaphor that got mistaken for a mechanism, repeated in enough documentaries and books that it started to sound like established science. It isn't. There's a reason this particular myth spread so successfully, and it's worth naming, because it says something about how easily a real, strange scientific finding can be stretched past what it actually shows. Quantum effects are genuinely counterintuitive, which makes them feel like fertile ground for any claim that also feels counterintuitive. But strangeness in one domain doesn't transfer to another just because both feel mysterious. The mathematics that describes an electron's behavior does not scale up to describe a decision made by a brain made of roughly 86 billion neurons operating in a completely different physical regime. Borrowing the vocabulary doesn't borrow the physics. To be fair to the people who first made this leap, the confusion is understandable. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, one of several ways physicists have tried to make sense of the observer effect, does use language about observation and measurement that sounds on the surface like it's talking about a conscious mind paying attention. Physicists mean something far narrower, a physical interaction between a measuring apparatus and a quantum system, not a person's beliefs or intentions. That narrower meaning got lost somewhere between the physics journals and the self-help shelf, and it never came back. Here's why that correction actually strengthens the case for manifestation instead of weakening it. You don't need quantum mechanics to explain why deciding something with conviction changes your results. The Pygmalion effect already explains it. Using nothing stranger than attention, expectation, and behavior, mechanisms every psychologist agrees are real, extensively documented across decades of research beyond that single 1968 study. The version of this practice that actually works was never about physics. It was always about psychology, and psychology alone is more than enough to make it work. There's something almost more satisfying about the honest version than the mystical one, once you sit with it. A claim resting on borrowed, misapplied physics is fragile. It collapses the moment someone who actually understands quantum mechanics pushes back on it, and that fragility quietly undermines confidence in the whole practice, even for people who never consciously questioned the science. Our claim, resting on a 60-year-old widely replicated finding in behavioral psychology, doesn't have that problem. It can survive scrutiny, which means you can build a real practice on it without secretly hoping nobody asks too many questions. So here's the deeper question this evidence forces open. If the real mechanism is this well documented and this available to anyone willing to use it, why does almost nobody practice it with enough conviction to see the Pygmalion effect turn on in their own life? There's a reason this question needs its own block to answer properly, rather than a quick line here. It's tempting to assume the answer is simple laziness or lack of discipline and dismiss it at that. But laziness doesn't explain why people who are otherwise disciplined in every other area of their life, careful with money, consistent at the gym, rigorous at work, still struggle specifically with this one practice. Something else is going on, something that has nothing to do with effort, and everything to do with what conviction actually costs a person emotionally, which is where we're headed next. It's worth pausing on that word costs for a second, because it's doing real work in this argument. Most self-improvement advice treats belief as free, as though deciding to believe something is simply a switch you flip once you understand it intellectually. It isn't free, it has a price paid in advance before you know whether the outcome will justify it. That price is exactly what the next block is going to name directly. Let's make this concrete, because there is almost certainly something you've half tried this way and quietly abandoned. Here's how to find it. Think of the goal you've stated out loud or written down or visualized, and then quietly stopped mentioning. Maybe out of embarrassment, maybe because nothing seemed to be happening fast enough. That abandonment point is worth examining directly, because it's rarely about the practice failing. It's almost always about what conviction actually requires of you, which is more than most people expect going in. Notice the specific moment the abandonment happened, if you can recall it. Was it after a setback? A rejection, a delay? A piece of news that seemed to contradict the goal? Or was it, strangely, after a small sign of progress, one that should have encouraged you to continue, but instead made you uneasy enough to pull back? Both patterns are common, and they point to the same underlying cause. The goal had started to feel real enough to actually lose, and losing something real hurts more than losing something you never fully believed in. Real conviction, the kind that actually shifts your filtering system the way Rosenthal and Jacobson's teachers shifted theirs, isn't the same as hoping. Hoping keeps one foot out the door, because hoping is designed to protect you from disappointment. If you only half believe something is coming, then when it doesn't arrive on schedule, you get to say, well, I never really believed it anyway, and the part of you that avoids risk gets to stay safe. Real conviction removes that exit. It commits fully enough that failure would actually hurt, and that's precisely the discomfort that makes most people quietly step back within days. There's a useful test for telling the two apart, and it's blunt but accurate. If the goal doesn't arrive, will you feel surprised, or will you feel confirmed in a suspicion you were quietly carrying the whole time? Surprise is the signature of real conviction. You genuinely expected a different outcome, so the actual result registers as new information. Quiet confirmation is the signature of hoping. Some part of you already knew, and the failure just proves what you'd never fully unlearned. This distinction also explains why people often describe manifestation as feeling different once it clicks. What's actually clicking isn't a spiritual shift. It's the moment hoping quietly turns into deciding, usually without a dramatic announcement. You just notice one day that you've stopped hedging the sentence when you talk about the goal, that you're taking the actions a person who fully expected the outcome would take, not the actions of someone still keeping an exit open. This is the part almost nobody names directly. The reason manifestation is hard to practice isn't the practice itself. It's that genuine conviction is emotionally exposed in a way hoping never is. You can hope for 100 things and lose nothing when they don't arrive, because you never fully staked your identity on any of them. Decide with real conviction that one specific thing is coming, and you've made yourself vulnerable to a very specific kind of disappointment. The kind where you can't blame bad luck anymore because you were the one who believed. Try this literally, not as metaphor. Take the goal you abandoned and notice honestly which version you are actually running, hoping with an exit built in, or deciding with the exit removed. Most people, examined honestly, discover they were hoping the entire time and calling it manifestation, which explains why nothing shifted. The Pygmalion effect doesn't activate on hope. It activates on the specific, embodied certainty that changes how you scan the world and how you show up in it, day after day, whether or not anyone is watching. There's a common objection worth addressing here directly, because it comes up almost every time someone hears this explained. Doesn't deciding with full conviction and then having it not work out hurt more than hoping ever would? Yes, it does. That's not a flaw in the argument. It's the actual price of the mechanism working at all. The Rosenthal and Jacobson teachers weren't protected from being wrong about a student either. Some of the randomly chosen students probably didn't bloom the way the teachers expected. The teachers who believed anyway were the ones whose average outcomes improved, not the ones who got a guarantee on any individual case. This won't feel comfortable at first, and it shouldn't. Removing the exit means sitting with real uncertainty about whether the thing will actually happen without the emotional insurance policy of secretly not believing it. That discomfort is the entrance fee, not a sign you're doing it wrong. There's a smaller scale version of this exercise worth trying before you attempt it on your biggest goal. Pick something modest, a specific outcome from a single conversation this week, something low stakes enough that failure won't devastate you, but real enough that success would be noticeable. Decide fully, without the hedge, that it's going to happen. Watch what you do differently in that one conversation, and watch what you notice in the days around it that you might have otherwise filtered out. The small version teaches the mechanism faster than the big one, precisely because the exposure is smaller and easier to tolerate. Run this small version at least 3 separate times before you judge whether the practice works for you. One data point in either direction tells you very little. A pattern across several small low-stakes attempts tells you a great deal more, and it costs you almost nothing to gather it. But knowing this and living it are two different animals, because there's a deeper reason most people won't pay that entrance fee, and it has less to do with the goal itself than with what conviction threatens to take away from them if it fails. Here is the layer underneath the layer. Hoping instead of deciding isn't just a weaker version of the same practice. It's a specific protective strategy, and it's protecting something real. Your identity as someone who was never fully exposed to begin with. As long as you only half believe, a failed outcome can be filed away as, "I knew it probably wouldn't happen," instead of, "I was wrong about something I staked myself on." The second version costs more, and most people, without ever consciously choosing it, arrange their entire relationship to their goals around avoiding that cost. This protective arrangement usually gets built early and quietly, long before anyone would call it a strategy. A disappointment that landed too hard at some earlier point, a dream that didn't happen, a hope that got publicly humiliated, taught some part of the nervous system that unhedged belief is dangerous. From then on, hedging becomes automatic, applied to every future hope by default, whether or not the current situation actually resembles the one that taught the lesson. Ask yourself honestly, is there a goal right now where you've been protecting yourself this way, quietly hedging your belief so that failure, if it comes, won't actually surprise you? Here's what happens when someone actually removes the hedge. Full conviction doesn't just change internal feeling, it changes visible behavior in ways other people register even when they can't name what shifted. Someone who has genuinely decided, rather than merely hoped, tends to speak about the goal differently, less tentative, less apologetic, less performing modesty to protect against the possibility of failure. They ask for the opportunity directly, instead of hinting at it. They follow up instead of waiting to be remembered. None of this is manifestation in the mystical sense. It's the Pygmalion effect running in reverse, applied to yourself instead of a classroom full of students. You become the teacher who believes in the 5 random names, and your own behavior starts producing the gains that belief predicted, not because the universe rearranged itself, but because you did. Think about what changes in a job search, specifically once this shift happens. A hoped-for job gets checked on nervously, mentioned tentatively, followed up on with visible apology for bothering anyone. A decided-upon job gets pursued with a directness that reads, to the person on the other end, as confidence rather than desperation, because it isn't performed confidence, it's the actual internal state leaking outward the same way desperation used to. Employers, like everyone else, respond to what they're actually reading, not to what a candidate is trying to project. This is the actual answer to the question in the title. It's easy because the mechanism is simple. Decide with real conviction. Let that conviction reshape your attention and behavior. Let the Pygmalion effect do the rest. It's rare because almost nobody is willing to trade the protection of hoping for the exposure of deciding, even once they understand intellectually that deciding is what actually works. Notice what this means about the phrase in the title, why almost no one dares practice it. The word dares was chosen carefully. This was never a difficulty of technique. Nobody fails at manifestation because the steps are complicated. Write it down, decide, act on what you notice. It's 3 steps and a child could follow them. What almost nobody has the nerve for is the middle step, the actual deciding, because deciding is the only one of the 3 that asks you to give something up first. Children, worth noting, are often better at this than adults, and not by accident. A child who wants something tends to decide it with total unhedged conviction before years of accumulated disappointment teach them to protect themselves with hope instead. Watching a young child pursue something they've decided they want, with a directness and a lack of self-protective hedging most adults have long since trained out of themselves, is watching the mechanism this entire video describes, running unfiltered. The practice isn't a skill to be learned from scratch. For most people, it's a skill to be relearned, stripped back down to something they already knew how to do before it got protected away. Somewhere between childhood and adulthood, most people accumulate enough disappointments that the hedge becomes the default, and full conviction starts to feel reckless rather than natural. Relearning isn't about becoming naive again. It's about deciding, as an adult who fully understands the risk, to pay the entrance fee anyway, which is a braver, more deliberate act than the unfiltered belief a child has never had to choose. I want to be honest about where this stops working, because a channel that only tells you the flattering version eventually loses your trust. Conviction changes your attention, your behavior, and the opportunities you notice and pursue. It does not override circumstances outside your control, and it does not guarantee any specific outcome on any specific timeline. The Pygmalion effect moved test scores through better teaching, encouragement, and opportunity, not through altering reality directly. Applied to your own life, conviction works the same honest way. It changes what you notice and what you do. It doesn't remove the need to actually do it, and it doesn't promise the door opens on your schedule instead of its own. There's one more limit worth naming plainly. This mechanism works on outcomes that involve other people's decisions, opportunities, and attention. Jobs, relationships, creative breaks, connections. It has no documented bearing on outcomes governed by physical law rather than human behavior. Deciding with full conviction that a coin will land on heads doesn't change the coin. The mechanism runs through psychology and behavior, not through altering probability itself. And the honest version of this practice only works where that channel actually exists. Keep that boundary in mind, and the practice stays honest, useful, and repeatable. Ignore it, and you're back to the same overreach that made the physics version of this idea collapse the moment anyone examined it closely. That's not a smaller claim than you create your reality with your mind. It's a truer one, and it's the only version of this that survives being tested against your actual life instead of a documentary trailer. I want to talk to you directly for a moment, because statistically, if you've watched this far, there's a goal you've been hoping for instead of deciding on. You know which one. Maybe you've said it out loud enough times that it started to feel embarrassing, like you're the only one who still believes it's coming. Maybe you stopped saying it out loud at all and just carry it quietly now, hedged, half-believed, protected from the disappointment of really trying. Here's what I actually want you to sit with. What would change, starting today, if you removed the hedge on that one thing? Not louder, not more desperate, just fully decided instead of quietly hoped. Not to guarantee it arrives, to find out what you notice and what you do differently once the exit is gone. I still catch myself hoping instead of deciding more often than I'd like to admit. This isn't a practice you master once and keep forever. It's one you keep choosing, especially on the days the exit looks tempting again. Some of you have been hedging so long on so many things that the hedge has become invisible. It just feels like being realistic. I want to gently push back on that word. Realistic and hedged aren't the same thing. You can be fully honest about the odds and still decide fully to act as though the outcome matters and is coming. The hedge isn't honesty. It's just the oldest habit in the room, wearing honesty's clothes. There's no dramatic moment where this fixes itself permanently. It's smaller than that and more repeatable, a choice you make again each time the old hedge shows up, which it will, probably tomorrow, probably around the exact same goal you've been carrying quietly. That's not a failure of the practice. That's what practicing something actually looks like. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. The next time you notice yourself softening a sentence about something you want, adding hopefully or we'll see or no pressure, when there actually is pressure, pause before you finish the sentence. Notice the hedge. You don't have to remove it every time. Just notice it once, honestly. That noticing alone starts loosening a habit most people never examine closely enough to change. This applies to more than the one goal you might have in mind right now. Once you start noticing the hedge in your own language, you'll likely start catching it everywhere. In how you talk about your career, your relationships, even small daily plans. Most people are more hedged than they realize, across nearly everything, simply because it became the default setting so long ago that it stopped registering as a choice at all. None of this requires an announcement to anyone else. The shift from hoping to deciding is almost entirely internal at first. It shows up in your own private language before it ever shows up in anything you say out loud. That's fine. It doesn't need an audience to be real. Let's return to where we started. The goal you wrote down. The affirmation in the mirror. The quiet stopping within a week before anything had really had time to happen. We asked at the beginning why something that starts working so easily gets abandoned so fast. Now you know why. It was never the practice that was hard. It was the exposure underneath it. The fact that real conviction removes your exit, and removing your exit means you can actually be wrong about something you staked yourself on. Hoping was always the safer choice. It just never worked, because safety and results were never running on the same mechanism. That trade, safety for results, is one you've probably been making unconsciously across more areas of your life than just the one goal this video brought to mind. It's worth going back through deliberately once this video ends. Which parts of your life have you kept safely hedged, and which parts have you actually decided on? The pattern, once you look for it, tends to explain a lot more than a single missed opportunity. Here's the layer this video hasn't said yet. The version of manifestation worth practicing was never about the universe listening. It was about you finally being willing to be the teacher who believes the random 5 names will bloom, and then acting day after day, like you actually mean it, because that belief was always the only thing standing between you and the exact mechanism that's been sitting there documented waiting to be used. The physics was never the point, and once you let that go, the practice gets stronger, not weaker, because it stops depending on a claim that couldn't survive scrutiny. What replaces it is smaller, plainer, and far more reliable. Attention, expectation, and behavior. 3 things you actually have access to starting today without needing anything stranger than your own willingness to decide. Once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. Every goal you've been hoping for instead of deciding on is now visible for what it actually is, protected, not pursued. That single distinction is worth more than any amount of visualizing ever was. Not because visualizing is useless, it's often the easiest entry point into deciding. But the visualizing was never the mechanism. The deciding was, the whole time. This is where the video ends, but the practice, if you actually run it, doesn't end here at all. It starts the next time you catch yourself hedging something you actually want. Not tomorrow necessarily, the next time, however soon that turns out to be. If there's one goal this video pulled into focus, put it in the comments in 5 words or less. I've been hoping for Pygmalion. Naming it as hope, honestly, is the first step toward deciding instead. And if this way of seeing things shifted something in you, subscribing here isn't about the algorithm. It's a small contract with the version of you that's learning to decide instead of hope. Every week, one more piece of the mechanism. If today's idea, that real conviction runs on documented psychology, not borrowed physics, is one you want to go deeper on, there's a companion piece that lays out exactly how to build that conviction day to day. It's a short ebook, quietly pinned in the comments below this video, worth a slow read if this is a pattern you keep circling back to in your own life. And if today changed how you think about what you've been quietly hoping for instead of deciding on, tomorrow's video goes to the place right before the shift actually happens. The strange, empty feeling that tends to show up right before a real change in your life, and why almost everyone misreads it as a warning sign instead of what it actually is. It's called right before a reality shift. Everything suddenly feels empty, and if today opened a door, that one explains the silence on the other side of it. Decide. Don't hope.